So just a very quick sense of who I am and sort of why I'm here. 13 years ago, I graduated from university. I'm 35 years old. I went straight to work in Parliament as an environmental lobbyist, campaigning there to try and save the whale, to promote climate change. Realised quite quickly that most politicians were just far too busy to give a damn about the things that I gave a damn about. And then I started getting interested in what are alternative ways of making decisions. I got interested in sort of community development, public involvement, that type of stuff. And I worked for a national European charity which did community activity, community action. I realised very quickly that the rhetoric around that and the academic debate in terms of overcoming the service co-production, in terms of what has now become social innovation, trying to inject legitimacy into our institutions, was completely detached from the practice on the ground. So 10 years ago I founded a international think tank charity called Involved, which is a guy from you may have heard of, but the sort of democracy world. It became quite big for a while, so I've been advising an awful lot of local and national governments all around the world on this kind of subject. And then 4 years ago I was asked by the UK government to set up a social venture called ISWE, which is all about how to connect communities and institutions using social technologies. And right now, actually, I'm taking a bit of a break and reflecting on that. I write for The Guardian and I write bits and pieces around the place. So that's my background. I live in Peckham, in South East London. Does anyone know? Anyone had heard of Peckham? Yep. Some of you may have been to Peckham. You may have been on this. You may have heard it was on the news in the summer of last year. It was one of the epicentres of the London riots. Bakers at the end of my street. It's not very good bakers, but nevertheless, it's, I don't think it really justified the action based on the quality of the produce. Or my French wife, maybe she did have some agreement with that. So I live here. This is my house. It's really literally that close to the fire. And in July last year, August last year, I was in southwest France with my wife, and just sitting there and said, "Oh, there's been a riot in Peckham," and saw this our street on fire, and our car, our Peugeot 307, was literally there, and there were people, there were quite a lot of other fires in the area you're not seeing on this particular picture. And I phoned my friend and I said, and I thought, well, also this is kind of what I do for a living, civic activity, obviously lots and lots is happening online, BlackBerry Messenger, etc. I wanted to get there, I wanted to get on a plane and get right back. My wife wasn't so happy about that, not because of anything to do with safety issues, because I hadn't seen her family in 18 months and I always keep avoiding seeing her family, so I stayed. But I was very worried about our car, because everyone else's car had been moved. And one of my friends, my neighbours, said, what's happening, what's going on? And all the shops have been closed down, everyone moved their car away, everyone's store was locked. I was also really aware that my front door, which was right onto the street, had extremely bad security. We're one of these kind of naive people that never had a break-in, although we live in a sort of slightly sort of rough part of London. But what happened, which was quite incredible, is that after the shops were destroyed, in quite a number of the different shops that took place, they got turned into spaces for people to actually say how they wanted Peckham to be, how they wanted the place to be. And the local council responded to this sort of uprising civic interest and activity by trying to channel some of the new ideas and thoughts into how they were trying to innovate in terms of their services. And I want us to, again, sort of get into that space today whereby we're really not just thinking about engagement online or face-to-face just as something which we do to other people, but which captures the imagination of other people, which captures things that happen which might not always be what you wanted to. I certainly didn't want to see my street on fire, but the civic activity that's risen up as a consequence of that has been phenomenal. And people often say, don't they, that after a death period, after a forest fire, that's when you get new growth. And I know that can be used sometimes in not always in a positive way, but certainly in the times we're operating in the moment when undesirable things are happening, I think we need to be in a really good space to respond, to react to that, and to be able to harness those things in ways that we weren't always sure about. I know you guys all know this, but this is really kind of, I think it's really important. The ICT is just changing everything about what is community, about how our lives are, our families. One of my projects I'm involved with at the moment called Digital Human. It's all about how technology is affecting us in ways we're not always that happy about. Who's spent sort of 10 minutes on Facebook and thought to themselves, I shouldn't have done that. I was wasting my life and my time. I mean, we're all claiming to be so busy, and yet we're addicted, we're hooked into one of these social technologies. And I'm really not sure that I needed to check out that information about someone I haven't met for 4 years, of what they were doing at the weekend. So it's changing our relationships. And who would say in the room today, who would say they are sort of the early adopters, the real pro-technology early adopters? Who would say they're about average? And who would say they're kind of like, late adopters, have you pushed into it? I'm probably, to some extent, in your camp. But my office bought me an iPhone a few years ago. They said, Rich, you've got to start using Twitter. And I can buy it myself, and I never would have done. Although I've got Macs, I'm not a big Steve Jobs fan. But that's a wider kind of. I'm an environmentalist, and I know he's into meditation and fruitarian. He wasn't very big on his kind of like philanthropy, which I really care about. Anyway. So it's changing things. Obviously, belt tightening, I think a profound issue in terms of this space. It's happening here, it's happening around the world. And I think the thing to think about is this intersection between civic involvement, online or face-to-face, and cuts, and actually where that's forcing us to focus in terms of innovation in services, co-production, use of technology, change to procurement. Who's familiar with different innovation models, sustaining versus disruptive innovation? Martin and a few others. We'll talk a little bit about that. I think it's absolutely critical to the future of this agenda. And I think there's a challenge for us from the democracy movement, because I really think there's a shift happening away from focus on legitimacy and representation towards innovation, improvement, and a focus on the stakeholder as opposed to representative models. But we could talk about that. And in your world, that may be quite different. But certainly in my world, it's no doubt about it, in most parts of the world, big shift away from legitimacy, big shift towards services, because money has changed things. Really had the lack of money. So there's this gear shift taking place from this interest in legitimacy involvement to try and get legitimacy into our public sector institutions and towards making things work with less money. And again, it's this transformation agenda. That's the point around sustaining versus disruptive innovation. A lot of the innovations that most public sector organisations have undertaken, I did a report, you can go on my website, called Surfing the Wave, and it's all about looking at how local authorities around the UK were responding to the big cuts. So we've had 20% public sector cuts in the UK. How are organisations responding to that? Are they ascending? Are they looking for new partnerships, new ways of doing things? Are they trying to find new models? Or are they descending, hunkering down, actually focusing upon what they need to do, historical relationships, not trying to reach out? And it's very clear that 85% are hunkering down. The CEOs are speaking the language of ascension, new partnerships, innovation, but most of the organisations don't even know how to do transformative innovation. And most of the CEOs actually don't know this distinction either. What's really happening is we're outsourcing lots of our services to people who can do it more cheaply, which may be a really, really good idea. I'm definitely not against that. But what I am against is missing the opportunity to transform. And I think it's really important that we help our organisations become conscious of the opportunity that faces them in this space to become transformative. Some of the issues that I know you guys face, big transport issues in Sydney. Many people have spoken to me about that this weekend. This was on the radio just a couple of days ago about the Murray-Darling Basin water resource issues. And of course, striking nurses, teachers' pay, lots of these issues are very, very alive. And a lot of them are all really connected. How do we have those conversations? How can we get wise, conscious decisions to emerge in what are often a highly politicised, and obviously as well, a highly politicised environment in Australia today. So thinking of these issues, thinking of the gear shift that's taking place, thinking how we can get things which respond to that. So do people think there's such a thing as a technical fix in this space? Who thinks, yes, technology can help us solve these problems?
Help us, did you say?
Yeah.
Help us. Fix it works.
Yeah, it's true. Who's more sceptical? Okay, so it's sort of even across the room. I mean, I personally have been on a real journey around this. I set up a social media company 4 years ago, really seeing the possibility of social technologies, and believing that there really could be a supportive technical fix. What I think has become the most powerful thing so far in my experience around social technologies has been that their ability to create the experience that it is possible to do things in new ways. So, for example, it's that classic phrase, it's easier to do your way into new thinking than it is to think your way into new doing. And for me, that's been a profound benefit of social technology. I'm not that sure if things like Twitter or Facebook, some of my friends have got tens of thousands of Twitter followers, and to be quite honest, I'm not sure how it's really serving them in their life. They don't really have as much money as they need. They seem to spend a lot of their lives on planes, and a lot of what they write, quite frankly, is I don't think of a massive high level of quality. So I think there's a really interesting debate at the moment around that sort of quantity versus quality issue in terms of social technologies. But one thing that I think is for sure, and hopefully I'll convince it of you later today, is that if you start things in the right way, you can often demonstrate that transformative change is possible, and that's so powerful. It's an advocacy on the basis of actually demonstration. I used to be a parliamentary lobbyist, and it was my job to argue kind of theoretically that we should have more environmental legislation that was stronger. Now it's become very clear to me what's far more powerful is to just do it and then tell people about it. Far more powerful. Now, I have far more influence now I'm a doer than actually when I was just an advocate. And not that advocacy is not important, it's very important. My son, he's got limited teaching techniques. His name's Sam. I really like him. Okay. So what I'm going to be doing now is going through these 10. This comes from an article I had in The Guardian in November last year. There's 6 principles there. There's 10 principles for you. You've got 4 extra, 40% extra. If you find it useful, go online and you can sort of forward around your colleagues and that kind of stuff. Anyone you need to convince. If they're kind of left of centre, they might like that. If they're on the right of centre, don't ever send it to them ever. So here we've got 10 principles. Now the first one is integral management. I'm going to go into some more detail about that later. Flexibility is the second one. And this is stating the blindingly obvious, but I've already been mentioning as part of this talk, but seek to be as adaptive, as flexible, and as responsive as you possibly can be. And I think it also links quite a lot to what I call here the new 80-20 rule. I believe when we're undertaking a digital involvement or any kind of involvement project, we need to be just investing 20% of the cash in the initial upfront technology, the website, or the event itself, whatever we might be doing, then 80% following up after that in terms of the wider comms, the iterative management, designing as we go along. And there's some real sort of key learnings around that. I've learned the hard way working with various social technology companies and losing quite a lot of money around. A lot of social technologies will come to you and they'll say to you, we're going to operate in a sprint model. They'll tell you that we're going to be adapting to your needs over the next 6 months to get you what you want. Whenever you're having a conversation with a company like the one I run, is just focus on the outcomes you want. Focus on the service improvement you need, the data you need, the people you need to have involved. And don't ever allow yourself to get blown away by the very impressive PowerPoints. Far more impressive than mine. But with very good graphics and videos looking beautiful. They don't read the book Black Swan. There's one small part of that book which I thought was very important, which is about how things like PowerPoint have enabled us to present things that are highly uncertain as being highly certain. And huge numbers of public sector organisations get convinced by the social media companies who really evangelically believe in their technology, and for good reason. They've seen it work in places before, but often the stuff that we're working with, real social issues, tough organisational culture, this kind of stuff, it's not that simple. But what we really need to be is highly flexible, really adapting to the needs. Evidence, the only evidence that counts is what's working. Not some research that's been done, not something that's been done elsewhere. That's not evidence. That's just something that happened somewhere else that might work here. Evidence is what you've done for your project that's having an impact. I think that's absolutely critical. If you've got people in your organisations who say we need evidence for the proof this is going to work, I know that sometimes we need to play that game to be able to convince them to create the funds or whatever to do this, and do that if you need to. But what really counts is what's working on the ground for you. So what I think was critical is in your budget having 20% to get going, then 80% for the future change, the adaptation to the new technology. Apps you might need, new people you might need to recruit, etc., and be continually monitoring. Then when you've got your clients out there, absolutely tying them in their contracts to the outcomes you need, not the outputs, not the events, not the website, not the beautiful specification that people like me will sell you that it's going to be the most wonderful thing ever. It might be, it may well be very powerful. What counts is what works. So be flexible. And then this point of going low cost first. When I first started everyone said to me, the first thing is you go to the people, go low cost first, etc. And that's exactly what we did. We started on Facebook, we started on Twitter, we did things in a very simple way. And then we found that actually for us, because we were working exclusively with public sector organisations, is that they needed really good quality data. And the data that we could get off most of the main sites like Facebook, the reason that Facebook's valued at 100 billion is they've got an awful lot of excellent data that they're never going to let you have. And so we started realising that we needed to build things ourselves. But what we made the mistake of doing was building an all-singing, all-dancing, fantastic sites that really worked for us. Actually, what we should have done, what we're doing now with all of our clients, is starting very small, and then building incrementally. And they might get to a point whereby you realise, actually, what you want does require a big technology solution, then go for it. Then you know you need that, you need to move into that kind of space. But I think that it's really important to be going low cost, being flexible, going with the energy, and also one of the real powerful things about that, I think if you're interested in the transformative stuff, I think that's a really big difference. It's often much easier to start under the radar. In my experience, there's kind of two kind of broad ways that in the public sector you can deal with deliver transformative processes. One is that above the radar, getting the chief executive involved, chair involved, high profile, significant funds, and make it happen. Or under the radar, only telling who needs to know. And you'll know your organisations better than I will. Over the last year, I would say about 50 to 60% of the projects I've been involved with have failed. Sad to say. And partly to do with the lack of cash out there, but it's not because of the lack of money as such, it's because it's creating a climate which is more risk averse. And so we're finding in our work in Europe that the under the radar model is much more appropriate. That might be different for you, and you'll know your own organisations and situations. I think the point is just to be conscious of going above the radar or under the radar. I'm going to talk a little bit more about building in-house skills later. This whole point about embracing failure, I would say that, I've had a hard few years. The new 80-20 rule I think is critical. I understand audience motivation, that's the values piece, I'm going to come into that later on. I think this is really important at the moment, getting the people you need, not the people you want. Too often in the public sector we've really focused upon getting things being demographically representative, involving people across the spectrum. And I think if like me, you do believe in democratic voice, which is what I really do believe in, it's very easy to get sucked into that. But unfortunately, with a lot of the things we're focusing on here, it's about getting the right people involved to deliver the outcome we're trying to get. And that isn't always everyone. So I think that's quite critical. And again, beware of going to people. People will always tell you to go to the people, that's how to build social technology projects. And that is true, but it's just too easy to say. Because yes, of course, there's an online platform out already on specific issues, say around a land management issue you need to go to, there's already a debate happening, go to that Facebook site, work with that existing community, absolutely. But actually what makes things really powerful is how you go with them. So for example, where I live in Peckham in South East London, there's a couple of really amazing sites there that are phenomenally low tech. But what's powerful about them is there's a low skilled ex-civil servant there. She doesn't know anything about IT. She just knows how to go to the website and keep her email list up to date and work brilliantly with the public sector institution. And so she manages the website, she emails out everyone all the time, gets people to attend events, etc. So it's not really about going to the people for her, well that's part of it, it's about knowing how the bureaucratic institutions function. It's about emailing the right people, getting the right people involved. So I just think it's just too easy for a social media consultant to say, just go to the people. It's true, there are limits to that. And then third generation engagement, we're going to talk a bit more about that as well. So anyone come across this before? This is kind of like this integral framework. So I think it's I find it incredibly powerful in my work, particularly around technology. So on the left, it's interior stuff, so what's happening in our organisation, in ourselves, psychological. On the right, It's external, specific projects that take place, systems, infrastructure, so it's things that are happening out in the wider world, and then things that are happening within organisations or within ourselves. The top left, it's values, motivations, critical to get people involved, psychology, are they pro or against technology, what methods will we work with. Down here it's culture, what kind of organisational culture have we got here, how do we work together, what works around here, what doesn't. Do we need to change that or do we need to work with that? Often very difficult to change. These are the specific interventions we're going to make. So in a moment we're going to talk about designing a process, and it'll be about here at the top right, actually what we're doing. And this is systems, broadband networks, money that's available, the economic and ecological system if we're operating in the environmental space. Now the point of doing this is that too often I have seen that the projects I've been involved with have lost sight of the context, the wider context they're operating within. So what I'm going to ask you to do for each of your projects later is map out each of these areas. So what are the systems that are critical here, broadband network, technology systems, cash, what organisational culture issues we're dealing with here, or community culture issues we're dealing with here, and what are the mindsets of people. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about their the values and mindsets in a moment. So yeah, we'll come back to that. Does that kind of make sense? We're an integral framework. And so to give an example of why that's really powerful, many of the, who's familiar with a website that hasn't worked, or if any piece of technology that hasn't had as many users as they wanted to? Anyone launch a website that hasn't had as many users? I mean, I think almost everyone has. That's usually symptomatic of investing in the project and the system, and not investing in understanding how to connect to people, or providing the incentive they want to have taking place. I'll give you an interesting example of this that took place recently for me. I was working in southeast London, and they wanted to undertake a project which was basically about how can we create a new kind of government working with our community, but we wanted to really broaden out to a wider group of people. I built them a website before that frankly wasn't working, but how many people checked into it a week? We're talking tens, very few were checking into it. They said we wanted far more people than that to be using it. We wanted to become alive. And I said, well, if we're going to do that, we need to do things quite different. And they had virtually no money. So I said, okay, well, what we'll do for this process is let's give a prize. So we knew the values of the people in their area, then the next largest group who would be likely to get involved would respond to cash and to money. Were far more individualistic. So what we did, we offered a £50, so about $75 prize every week people getting involved. And they got 800 people involved, which for them, for one of their processes, was kind of amazing. I don't know if it was that successful for any of you guys. 800 for a small count of sort of 80,000. It's pretty successful for that kind of focus group. And we went back and why did they get involved? And the traditional community advocates said we got involved because we wanted to improve the community. But we found the offering of the £50 prize insulting. I would really prefer you never do it ever again, if that's okay. We asked the 85% of people who all knew why they got involved for the prize. Don't really care about the community, it's not that important to us, but we just did it for the prize basically. We thought it would be quite fun to get the money. And that was both really important, both for the authority to understand, but it was that we shared those results with the community sector, and that was a game changer for them, because they thought they were representatives of the community, and they just weren't. They were representatives of their own values and of their own needs, and they were good people, definitely making a valuable contribution to the area, but actually speaking to them the whole time was not serving the process. So I think what we're trying to do here is figure out how we can get more people into the systems over here, like understanding how people function. Okay, what I'm talking about here is about actually getting staff as part of your organisations who've got a little bit of tech skill. Have any of you guys got people in your organisations who know how to do a bit of coding, that kind of stuff? Anyone? A few people? Excellent news. And this is an example of two of my favourite people who both work for institutions. He works for the European Commission, he works for Devon County Council. They're both fairly senior staff members, but they also know how to do enough coding to get the most out of WordPress. They also work with WordPress consultants in their part-time. And what that has enabled them to do is to design very powerful sites at a really low cost in this kind of engagement space. So Carl Haggerty did the site for Devon County Council, which I mentioned before, which had about 20,000 people. It's called Tough Choices Around the Budget Cuts. They claim it only cost them 5,000 UK pounds, about 7,500 Australian dollars. And David's been doing this very big, I've been working with him on it, very big process called the European Digital Agenda. And again, what's really powerful is that because they've got the skills, they can then build this sort of incrementally internally, but also they know how the institutions function, they know how the systems work, they know how to engage with people in what way. And so that kind of so they don't look beautiful, the sites that they built do not look amazing, but they're very, very powerful. And what's really, really interesting is that when they've needed to get external organisations in to do contracts, because they only have limited skills, they can then be on the board of selecting these people. So basically, they can actually scrutinise people and actually, so they don't get blown away by the PowerPoint presentations. They can ask the right questions to configure the contracts in a way that works. And so if you don't have people like this new organisations, I couldn't recommend it more highly. It's really, really a wonderful thing to do. And do tweet them. I'm sure they'll be happy to talk about their role and their function. So yeah, this is the project I've been working on with David. What's most interesting about this, and I should have put up Robert Madeline's Twitter feed here. Robert Madeline's the Director General. This probably speaks really well to your point around trying to achieve culture change in the public sector. So I don't know, has anyone ever done any work in Brussels? or in France? It's quite similar. My wife's French, I can say that. You know, it's not majorly functional, not majorly. I mean, if you get lots of very highly intelligent people together, don't speak the same first language, and give them impossibly difficult projects, like trying to achieve, harmonisation of climate change abatement strategies between countries like Poland and Spain. It's a pretty difficult organisational structure they've got there. But Robert Madeline, the Director General here, is a really enlightened guy, and he was aware that to be able to deliver these kinds of strategies, they really needed to change the culture of these organisations, basically become better at talking to one another. So what he did in June last year, they had a process called the Digital Agenda process. How it works is once a year they have a big conference, and the idea is to pump, and that conference just pumps people around the system. So it's an idea of combining the online social networking, the face-to-face meetups with these big showpiece events. So once a year in June you have the Digital Agenda Assembly, which I'm involved with running. And what that does is basically that's linked to the online network, and they use that major event to pump the citizen involvement and create enthusiasm through the system. And then they allow people for example, to run their own events as part of that locally. But what Robert did, which was profoundly influencing in terms of the culture, is he said in June last year, I want all of my staff over the summer, where it's pretty low risk time, to just start using social technologies, to just start using Facebook, Twitter. So he started using it himself. One of Martin's ex-colleagues, Diogo Vasconcelos, was very influential in terms of this kind of debate, really providing giving him the sort of evidence to be able to make that kind of happen, which he needed in this instance, absolutely. And so basically, for a period of 2 or 3 months, all these very old-fashioned Brussels bureaucrats started using Twitter, started using Facebook, just doing new kinds of things, and just trying to communicate with people. He said, look, if things go wrong that are unexpected, that's okay. I'll take the fact that obviously if you do something malicious or manipulative, that's not okay, but provided you're using it for a reasonable way, that's fine. And the transformation that's taken place in that organisation is quite profound in terms of demonstrating to them the power of what these technologies could do. I ran an event just for an internal event called the Civil Servants in November. There's 150 civil servants there. It's quite a big DG, so the core people involved in the project. And we had over 1,500 tweets on the hashtag. I mean, this is just, obviously some people came externally, but for a civil servant-led event, I mean, even in the States or in the UK, which is usually much better than a European country on this, I've never seen anything like that. And it's all because Robert has given them the permission to be able to do that. There's this whole idea that you can do your way into new thinking, you can't think your way into new doing. And that's a particular cultural challenge. We're dealing with a very cerebral organisation, like most public sector organisations we're working with. Okay, who's familiar here with value segmentations? Anyone at all? Martin a little bit. Brenton saw it last week. Well, okay. This is absolutely, and I don't know, it may be very useful for you in your work. For me, it's absolutely changed my view on public involvement. And I remember the project, the very specific project which changed that perspective. I was doing some work in Oldham, which is a city in the north of England, and we did an initial analysis of who was getting involved with their community based on demographics. And it's pretty good representation: rich, poor, black, white, usual kind of stuff, old, young, based upon their population who actually lived there. Then we did one according to the values, and 85% were from one values type. They were from the egalitarian values type. that only counts for 25% of the population, with 75% of the population wanting values that were never turning up. And so there's a really important disjuncture here between the values and the actual demographic representation. And I think it's just profound in terms of actually why aren't we always getting the numbers involved that we'd like to. So there are various different ways of cutting this cake. One of the most popular is one by an author called Cultural Dynamics, a book written by Chris Rose called What Makes People Tick. I think it's very good. They use a model which is settlers, pioneers, and kind of meritocratic. I can't remember what it is now. Settlers, pioneers, and kind of fun seekers. It's what I call individualism. The reason that I don't use it in this instance is I think it's slightly too low resolution to be useful for the public sector, because they only have three groups, and they basically have 60% of people being what they call pioneers, and they mix up basically the individualists and the egalitarian. But it's a very popular model, and it's much, much better than anything else. It's very simple. It's good to understand. So here we've got tribal. These are people who are often in gangs, people who are potentially have their identity very, very closely related to their location, want to get immediate pleasure right away. So these are often the people who are the hardest to get involved in civic life. This is the tribal at 10%. These values are based upon across the West. They're all aggregated at Western. So, for example, in the UK and in France, we have more egalitarians and less tribal. I don't know what it is. I'd imagine you'd have even more in Australia. Conformist. So this is very often sort of Republican voters, people who really believe in their particular faith group, but a traditional form of their faith group. There's lots of people in, say, Islamic or Christian groups, or often could be in this kind of conformist group. So they're motivated by trying to keep things the same. So in France, it's very big. In France, they tend to motivate. They judge by progress by keeping things the same, whereas in the UK, it's about making things different, which has big consequences for our kind of culture. But so that's in the conformist, 25%. Individualist, classic people working in for business. I've got quite a lot of this in my blood. We've all got all of some of this in us, all of us. So you'll see echoes of this in all of it. It can get some people can find this pigeonholing very challenging. Does anyone find it challenging at all in the room? No, some people find it very challenging. And if you do, that's really normal. I used to find it very, very challenging. But it's proving very useful. This is individualist. So I don't know if you have them I don't think you do have them in Australia, but in the UK you have stations in the big cities like oyster bars, which are often silver. They serve champagne and oysters. I always wonder who actually goes into these places. I go past every day on the way to work, and they're always empty. So I even ask them, well, how can they make any money? And it's between 3 o'clock and 5:30, they sell the seats on the way waiting for Heathrow, basically after doing a day's worth of business. They sell them for a lot of money. But these are often kind of people at the really top of the individualistic. They're willing to have their oysters and champagne. Who wouldn't, egalitarian, people who often work for charities or the public sector, motivated by the environment, bigger issues, making society better, etc., etc. This is the point I'm trying to really make here. Is never assume that people are like us. Most people in this room, just by coming here, will be egalitarian and a mixture of egalitarian and individualistic. And that's really problematic when we're trying to design our public engagement strategies, because most people aren't like us. We're really unusual. And so one of the arguments I've been having with the environmental sector that I'm from is that almost all the communications campaigns basically say, save the whale. Well, that's great, but no one cares about saving the whale, except for these guys. So it's just profoundly important to be aware of that in this kind of space. Then there's this sort of distinction I was mentioning before between innovation. So there's sort of a gear shifting now onto innovation, and the difference between sustaining and disruptive innovation. All of this comes from these things come from my civic limits report that I wrote. So go in there, it's all written down, just download the publication. And it's just, if we're trying to support transformation, what we're really looking at here is identifying the disruptive opportunities and creating the channels, like what we've seen happening in TACM, to channel that disruptive energy into positive things that can happen. So if we're going to be having a service closure, which is going to have significant or change, that may be the right thing to do, but it's going to get lots and lots of opposition. How can we channel that energy into a new website, into a series of events, running events locally, that can actually get good things to happen as a consequence of that? We'll come on to third generation engagement in a moment. Participatory budgeting, looking at how, when you're giving people real power to do these kinds of things, that tends to be disruptive. Okay, so this is an example of a project I'm involved with at the moment. One of the really wonderful things that the UK government's doing at the moment is they're creating 1,000 community organisers. Do you have community development officers? I believe you do in Australia. Are people familiar with that concept? I think it's been going a long time, as I understand it. So this is sort of a new version of that, slightly less adversarial and far more about sort of getting things done. So community development officers used to be sort of getting things done. This is more sort of, it used to be about being sort of campaigners. This is far more about just getting things done. So my organisation is running the digital element of this. It's about trying to create, over the next 4 years, 1,000 community organisers across the UK who have got skills, who are equipped digitally. So how that's going to function, it's not a web-based project at all. What it is every quarter we get 40 new inputs of the community organisers, and we run them through a process whereby they get given digital skills to be able to organise locally around what they want to do. It has coaching, we have events whereby they leave the class actually with specific applications developed, etc., etc. The big challenge for us in this space is that many of the people who are community organisers like meeting people face to face, and they are anti-technology. And it's very, very normal in this kind of space. And then what we're finding, we've only just started doing it this year in 2012, we're just literally starting as I'm speaking, is that we're finding that they're surprisingly we're surprised how quickly they're getting turned on to technology. They're becoming, when we run an event or a workshop like this, that we have it all being set up with computers, etc., they leave with new profiles, and all of a sudden they set up particular applications. They've got people using it already in their communities. And so it's been quite impressive how it's started so far. It's very much work in progress. I can tell you about that. So this is third generation engagement. I thought about this when we were working on worldwide views. It's kind of this post hoc imposition of a framework. So it's the idea that historically when we've done engagement, it's been reactive and unstructured. So someone would campaign, sort of in the 1980s, when people would campaign, be opposed to things, and react to that and try and resolve the issues and move on. Over the last 10, 15 years, it's been much more about consultation strategies, proactive, systematic. You get involved in this kind of way, demographically representative, using new technology to hoover up information. The problem with this approach is unless you're actually within the nostril of the hoover, you're forgotten about. And it's very expensive to suck information out of people when they're not that interested. But who's done a consultation engagement process when no one's given a damn? I don't know, I mean, most of us must have done. I mean, it's very, very common. I think we're moving now much more towards trying to create frameworks and systems that enable people to get involved on their own terms, in the way they want to, but which also fits with how institutions are making decisions. So much more interactive, responsive. An example of this is what we've been doing with the French government. Go online, this platform's there. I think it's got a few thousand people registered so far. I have to admit, it's going to proving a bit more challenging than we hoped. But basically what we've got here is a system whereby it's a sort of Facebook social network style interface, but within it you've got research tools. So as opposed to traditionally the department would just go out there and would say, we want to go have a consultation on this particular area. They say, these are the kind of broad areas we're going to be working on over the next 12 months. If you're doing some work in this space, please, get involved and give us your input, organise events. We want to hear from you. If there are particular e-petitions or particular research you want to undertake, we'll do it in a way that we can get access to that. So it's a big opening up process for the French government. It's really come from them practicing some of the more sort of open gov type stuff, then getting this being overwhelmed by the data and information. Too much noise, basically, not enough useful information.